Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Chasing Wisdom and I'm Ashton. And today we're going to be talking about another book that is very dear to my heart and I have found such joy into reading it. It's called How to Change Your Mind by Pollan. And some of you may have remembered Pollan. He's written other books such as like The Omnivore's Dilemma. A lot of them are basically cookbooks or food books. And he's a very well-established author. And it's kind of surprising to see a well-established author talk about subject that has a lot of controversy behind it, which is psychedelic drugs. I first heard of this book when I was listening to Joe Rogan podcast with him, and he's also been on other podcasts with like Tim Ferris, Sam Harris as well, and I'll leave links for those podcasts in the description if you want to check it out, along with this book. Michael is a teacher at Harvard and UC Berkeley for writing courses. Anyway, I love this book so much just because how amazing these drugs really are, especially for the mental health world. There's a lot of science at big prestigious universities, like one of them, Johns Hopkins, and they're all searching for ways these drugs impact mental health. They found that it helps with addiction, depression, end-of-life anxiety, so when you're on your deathbed and people are anxious about what dying is going to be like. It also helps with neuroplasticity, which is like development of new brain cells and brain neural pathways, essentially. This book does a really good job of explaining kind of the history of psychedelics, and Pollan does a very excellent job of really going to the roots of what started psychedelics, the science behind it, and then he talks about his own experiences and what he thinks of them. He was going in there with a very skeptical kind of perspective, which a lot of people do, and one of the best things I've heard about psychedelics, essentially, to try to describe it to someone, is you can try to meditate or do like yoga, let's say, to achieve a good mindset, and it may not necessarily work. But if you give someone a psychedelic such as like LSD, psilocybin mushrooms, MDMA, DMT, they're gonna come away with something. And whether it's good or bad, it just depends on different factors such as set and setting, and he talks about that in the book. And basically, he comes away saying this drug is mind-blowing what he was able to take away from it. It's very impactful, and there's so many stories of people who have been impacted in a very positive way. And he goes through some of these stories. He, I think, had his own story of DMT, LSD, and psilocybin, and his experiences, and he did it through a guide, which is someone who's kind of certified with handling these drugs and watching over you, and he talks about that as well. He also talks about all the new science that's been coming up. There's kind of this huge wave of psychedelic renaissance research coming back, such as like Johns Hopkins, I think New Mexico University, a couple big universities there are doing some of these psychedelic experiments. And there's a lot of very important work to be done with these drugs because the effects they have on mental illness is mind-blowing. I mean, I think they were talking about with addiction, for example, the average addiction rate of success for regular treatment is only 20% before the rest of them fall back to their addiction, while psychedelics have up to 60%, which is mind-blowing. And the psychedelics also are in combination with psychoanalysts or psychiatrists and psychologists, psychotherapy type of treatment. This book is super amazing, just to also clear away some of the stigma that these drugs had. Things like marijuana, LSD, psilocybin are all considered these terrible drugs, but when you actually look into the research of what they're capable of and also the history of why they have this bad rap, it kind of makes sense. I mean, hell, we got tobacco and alcohol, which are legal. And alcohol literally is the only drug out there that affects every part of your body in some shape, way, or form. Any part, brain, liver, pancreas, bladder, name it. It affects almost every organ, some part of your body at least. Well, typically other hardcore drugs such as heroin and crack don't necessarily do that. They kind of act on certain areas only and they stay within those areas. But I think this book is super important to kind of lend eyes and credibility into what these drugs are capable of doing and the impact they may have on society towards the future. It's a long book, it's 400 pages. It's not very dense. Again, Pollan's an excellent writer, and I highly recommend checking out some of his other works as well. But this book in itself is super important, I think, just for anyone who is skeptical about drugs or very interested in what's going on there with treatments to mental illness, because I think this has a lot of promise. And this is actually something I'm studying personally. I have other books up here, the psilocybin solution. I have Aldous Huxley up here as well, Stanislav Grof on LSD. I mean, I've read a bunch about them. I'm currently reading a book right now by David Nutt, and he talks about drugs without the hot air. And essentially it's just talking about where these misconceptions of drugs come from, all drugs, and how really policy of government needs to be taken out from science because there's a lot of conflicting principles with that. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and I hope you check it out. Again, I'll leave a link below in the book and podcasts that he's been in, and just go check those out and give it a shot. You know, I know a lot of people have this skeptical mindset on these drugs, but really, if you look at it with an open mind, or at least go in there with an open mind, I think you'll be blown away with the impact these drugs have and can continue to potentially have without very little to none side effects that are negative, at least so far as we know. Again, research is still kind of new. But I just want to say thank you again for choosing this channel. I know there's so many channels out there to choose from, and I just really appreciate your support, and I look forward to hearing from you guys again.